To our special program, Saltwater City, The Beginnings with Paul Yee. My name is Sarah Ling. I'm the chair of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society, and it's a true pleasure to see all of you, our members, special guests, and of course, our honored speaker, Paul. I'd first like to recognize that where we are located as a society in Vancouver of British Columbia is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Our society has taken great pride in documenting the historical relationships between early Chinese migrants and First Nations in the province, and it's something we continue to look forward to doing. We invite those of you who live outside of Vancouver and in places such as Toronto to reflect on the lands on which you are situated this evening. I'd like to begin by acknowledging my fellow board of directors who are here this evening. So I will read out their names and invite each of them to give a little virtual wave. We have John Atkin, our co-vice chair of CCHSBC. We also have Rob Ho, who couldn't be here as he is a new father, so he's celebrating with his young one. Joyce Tang, our secretary treasurer. Catherine Clement. Christy Fong, who is stick handling the program this evening. Vivi Wong. Henry Yu. And we also have Larry Chin and Dominique Bautista, who could not be here with us this evening. I'd also like to recognize Grace Wong, chair of the Chinese Canadian Museum Society of BC, who are our community partner for this program. Many of you may recall that it was just over a year ago today that we would have been celebrating our annual banquet in Vancouver, Chinatown. And it was at that time when we would have had Paul here to speak as our 2020 honoree. But the world did turn upside down for the world, and it certainly has been a year of tremendous challenges as well as loss. I'd like to take a moment to recognize that just last month in March, we unfortunately lost Colonel Hao Li, one of our founding board of directors. Colonel Li was a generous soul to many of those in our community and many of you, and was also the founder of the Chinese Canadian Military Museum. But we are really grateful that we had very fond memories of celebrating Colonel Li's achievements when we bestowed him as our 2019 honoree in the Floda restaurant in Chinatown. And that's the photograph that you see here on the screen. So it's with sadness that we make that announcement, but look forward to continuing to find ways to celebrate his legacy and to continue to support the work of our colleagues and friends at the Chinese Canadian Military Museum. So although there have certainly been challenges that have been put in front of us, it's also been a year where individuals and organizations across the province have continued to make great progress in documenting and celebrating Chinese Canadian history. And it's certainly been a remarkable year with that regard. And so it's very fitting, I think, that we have the opportunity to have Paul share about his works over the decades, but to think about where we've come now as a collective. And so at this moment, I'd like to invite John Atkin to introduce our annual prize winners. Traditionally at our banquet, we kick off the evening by recognizing the achievements of not only students, but individuals and organizations who have made contributions to Chinese Canadian history, whether it be through archiving, their own publications, or community efforts. And so without further ado, I will invite John to announce those prize winners and also introduce them, as we have a few of them joining us here this evening.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got a couple of slides that will come up with, there we go. So I have the privilege of sitting with Christy, who's stick handling the presentation tonight, as well as the chair of the prize committee, Rob Ho. And it's always interesting and fun to look at what gets submitted, and also we sit down and think about books that we've seen that might fit the criteria as well. And so this year we had some very interesting nominations. And so to kick things off tonight, we have the Doctors Wallace and Madeline Chung Prize for Chinese Canadian Community Archiving. And the winner is the Lytton Chinese History Museum, and the co-founder is Lorna Fendrich. And we did a field trip a couple of years ago when you could do field trips, and visited the museum and Lytton in the area. And it's a fascinating project. And so I'll just read what I have here in my script, which is located in BC's interior. The Lytton Chinese History Museum collects, preserves, and displays artifacts and photographs of the vibrant Chinese community who once lived in the region from 1858 to 1928. Situated on the grounds of a former Chinese joss house, the museum traces Chinese involvement in the gold rush and railway construction in the area, and has created a greater awareness of the historic links between the Chinese community, First Nations people, and other local residents. The site opened in 2017 and has now been formally recognized as a historic place with provincial significance, and is on both the British Columbia and Canadian registers of historic places. Lorna also spent countless hours building a digital database for her entire collection of over 1,600 pieces, and made it available through the museum's website, which has been noted as a valuable resource by scholars and has drawn interest from around the world. And that's what we're awarding the prize for, is that digital collection and the opportunity to, well, sit here in Vancouver and browse through the collection and look at things. And so that's our first prize for the community archiving. And if you do get a chance when you're allowed to travel, it's well worth taking a visit up to Lytton. The museum itself is small but quite lovely, and there's lots of interesting history up in Lytton to visit. Our second prize that we're giving out tonight is one that we really liked this one. It's the Dr. Edward Whitberg Graduate Prize in Chinese Canadian History. And our winner tonight is retired Colonel Chris Weckler. I believe Chris is with us this evening. And so I'll read what I have here too. And this was, well, I'll talk about it later. Chris Weckler, his master thesis, Secret Warriors in the Pacific War, Chinese Canadians and Special Operations Executive, 1944 to 1945, at the University of Victoria's Department of History, focuses on the secret military missions of the 145 Chinese Canadians loaned to the Allied powers during the Second World War in 1944 to 45. His unique study examining declassified files from the British National Archives in London, England, uncovers the unrecognized contributions of the largely unknown servicemen who later returned to Canada to fight for full citizenship rights for all Chinese Canadians. Chris's research will be a major contribution to Chinese Canadian military history, and we have a prize that we award for this, and he has graciously offered to donate his $1,000 prize to the Chinese Canadian Military Museum here in Vancouver. And we think that's an extraordinary gesture, which is quite lovely. And all of us on the committee, when we read through the thesis, it was great because it was, from my perspective, it was dense. There was a lot there to read, but the value of it is the avenues of new research. And I think looking at records that we haven't seen referenced before, etc., it was really quite something. And so we're very pleased as a jury to be unanimous to award the Whitberg Graduate Prize to retired Colonel Chris Weckler. So congratulations on that one. And yes, so now we have our book prizes, and we received a few nominations. And so in going through them, we really liked the winner of the Edward Whitberg Book Prize for the best book on Chinese Canadian history. And the winner is Deep and Sheltered Waters, The History of Todd Inlet. And this is by Dr. David Gray. And what we liked about this was that he's taken an exceptionally long period of time to really document the history of Todd Inlet. And I'll just read what I have here. Author Dr. David Gray tells for the first time the complex story of Chinese and Sikh immigrant workers who lived and worked in Todd Inlet near Victoria, BC. The book follows these laborers, including 239 Chinese males, as they help construct a new cement plant for Robert Bouchard's Vancouver Portland Cement Company. And the Chinese workers' major role in the construction, development, and maintenance of the world-famous Bouchard Gardens. Gray's book carefully traces this long-vanished Chinese community through painstaking research in provincial and national archives and personal on-site explorations over a period of more than 50, that's 50 years. The book describes the previously unknown personal experiences of these men, and we felt it was a major contribution to Chinese Canadian history in BC. Again, this was a unanimous decision, and what we liked about this was that in so often when writers and historians are talking about something like a development of a cement plant, there's a reference to, oh yeah, and the Chinese laborers lived over here. And then they get back to the main players. And what was really interesting here was the research in how, for instance, groceries, where did the groceries come from in Victoria's Chinatown, for instance? The fish peddler that came out to the settlement, and various other things. And so again, avenues of research that really open up sort of another life to things. And certainly when I was reading the book, I was making notes about retailers and grocery and vegetable dealers, because again, that'll help in some work that I'm working on. And so that's why we awarded the prize, because of the detail and really bringing those stories alive. And so for that, we're very pleased to award the Whitberg Book Prize for Best Book on Chinese Canadian History to Deep and Sheltered Waters. And that's a publication of the Royal BC Museum as well, which was interesting. Now, we did have a runner-up, and we really liked as well a book called Chinatown Pretty. And this, we gave it an honorable mention just because of what the book subject was, and that was basically the style of Chinese seniors, and when you see them on the street. And so I'll just read what we have here. Chinatown Pretty is a storytelling project that documents senior citizens' street style in Chinatowns, combining urban utilitarianism with unexpected clothing choices that reveal resilience, personal histories, and cultural values. The authors photographed and interviewed hundreds of seniors in historic Chinatowns across North America from 2014, and including a chapter on Vancouver's Chinatown and the vibrant and active community organizations that champion the neighborhood. The project is not only a celebration of this unique style, but is a way to share the seniors' immigration stories and life wisdoms. By giving readers a lighthearted look at the demographic that rarely receives positive attention, Chinatown Pretty provides an important reminder of the deep historical connections seniors have to these areas, and the need to recognize their visibility in our neighborhoods. And this is particularly important given the current rise of anti-Asian hate crimes occurring across the continent. And we really did want to give an honorable mention because one of the key things that we really enjoyed about the book was that it presented Chinatowns as their own places. And so often when we see stories or media reports about Chinatown, they're almost sort of seen as one size fits all and that all Chinatowns are the same. And here you get that vibrancy of the folks that are there in the stories. And as we said in our write-up too, we don't often think of the seniors beyond just the seniors or being disadvantaged or needing help. But here they come alive. And so we really, really liked the book. And again, the honorable mention was a unanimous decision. And so we're very pleased to give the honorable mention for this to Chinatown Pretty. And I think that's it, isn't it? Yep, that's our book prizes and history prizes. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, John. So if we weren't all muted, we could give a virtual round of applause, but you could use the little emoji tool to do that. But congratulations to all our prize winners, 3 of them which are here this evening. It's wonderful work that you're doing, and although we weren't able to congratulate you in person this year, we will be mailing you a nice certificate and hope to invite you back for our next banquet together. So without further ado, it's the moment you've all been eager for, some of you waiting as long as a year for this very moment. But it's with great pleasure that we officially get to announce with our wonderful members and extended community that Paul Yee is our 2020 honoree. And I won't spare you the 5-minute introduction I would take to read his very, very lengthy bio and long list of accomplishments. But Paul, it's really an honor for our society to have this opportunity to thank you for all of the wonderful work that you've done and for you to reflect on really a pivotal project, the Saltwater City exhibition and publication that I think laid the ground for a lot of the work that we are celebrating and building on today. So to have you and your colleagues at that time lay the foundation is really something we want to celebrate. And so traditionally, for those of you who have been to our banquets in Chinatown, you will know that we like to have a little bit of fun with our honoree. And so this evening, we have the pleasure of hearing from two people that know Paul pretty well, Hana Wei and Ramona Mar, who have offered to not only toast Paul's achievements, but to roast him. And so we actually, spent an evening pre-recording a pop quiz that Hana and Ramona have put together so that all of you can not only test your knowledge of Paul's portfolio, but get to know the real Paul Yee. And so we do have Hana here, as you can see with us. Ramona's sister, unfortunately, has her birthday today, so she's in another virtual celebration. But we're going to play that program for you and then invite Hana to say hello. Can everyone see this okay? Over to you, Hana and Ramona.
Ramona, please.
Hey, okay. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone, and hello, Paul. Well, we were just puppies when we first met 40 years ago. If you recall, it was at the Chinese Benevolent Association and an informational meeting on the W5 controversy. And Hana, I think Paul remembers that you were instrumental in that. Little did I know then that the people I met there were going to be the entry to a whole new world of Chinese Canadian activism and community, and from Penderguy programming to a slew of ad hoc committees, and ultimately the Saltwater City Exhibit Planning Committee with Paul heading it up. And we had so many meetings, you know, the old-fashioned face-to-face kind with photocopied minutes typed out in the days long before internet and this thing called Zoom. And now here we are, in a year that still has a futuristic ring to it, paying tribute to you and all you have achieved so far. My apologies that I'm not actually able to be here live at the moment, as my sister has chosen today as an inconvenient time to have a milestone birthday. How inconsiderate, but I want to give you my fondest greetings and congratulations on this honor that the CCHSBC is bestowing upon you. This is going on too long. This is a long overdue and deserving tribute, as I know everyone gathered here agrees. Now, you do realize that true friends would not let you get away without a little ribbing, and to that end, Hane and I would like to present. So actually, Hane, if I'm gonna go on that long, or just cut me off, maybe you should speak first.
I don't think that's too long.
It's okay, that's fine.
Because
Sorry about that, everyone. This is how you can tell it's live entertainment. I've actually, I have two versions of that recording. There was one that was a rehearsal and one that was the polished version. So it's my mistake, I'm playing the rehearsed version, but that adds a little bit more entertainment to the evening. So if you just give me a second, I will pull up the correct version. Hane, perhaps you can fill in here for a minute to say hello. And you're on mute right now. Hane, we'll have to get you to unmute.
Is this better? Yeah. Hey, Paul, Ramona and I have been working on this for over a year. Okay, so we have a biography quiz for you, for everybody. It's the unauthorized Paul Yee biography quiz. It's multiple choice. So every answer can be a right answer. So you can go thumbs up, thumbs down as to what you think is the correct answer. But we rehearsed it with Sarah, and it's on tape. Ramona cannot be with us this evening, and but she sends her very best. Okay, Sarah, are you ready to roll the tape?
I'm ready to roll the tape, and I realized I should also introduce who you and Ramona are, because not everyone is familiar with both of your contributions. So for those of you who don't know Hane, and it might just only be a handful of you, he is a founding board member of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society and served as our president between 2006 and 2008. He's worked for numerous community organizations, the federal and provincial public service, and was formerly a sessional instructor at UBC's Faculty of Education. So we've been really fortunate to continue to benefit from Hane's service. As an ex officio, he still continues to attend every single board meeting. And Ramona Mar, who I've had the pleasure of just getting to know, was born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, where her father, Hung, was a bush pilot, and he was stationed there. Her teen years were spent or misspent in Burnaby and at SFU before she found her way to Pender Street, building her career in journalism. And her uncle Roy Ma was the founder of Chinatown News. She then enjoyed a life-affirming stint on the Penderguy radio program and several Chinatown projects, including the Saltwater City Exhibit Planning Committee. And she's BC's first Chinese Canadian full-time female radio newscaster. So we're very fortunate that Ramona is back in Vancouver and an active member of the society. And so without further ado, here's the actual recording by Hane and Ramona. Over to you, Hane and Ramona.
thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone, and hello, Paul. A bit of memory first to think you and I were just puppies when we first met 40 years ago. If you recall, it was at the Chinese Benevolent Association and an informational meeting on W5. Little did I know then that you and all the people I met in that room were my introduction to a whole new world of Chinese Canadian community and activism, from Pendergai radio programming to a slew of ad hoc committees, right up to our Saltwater City planning exhibit committee. And we had a lot of meetings in those days, you know, the old fashioned face-to-face kind, but, you know, where we saw each other and we handed out photocopied minutes and then we went out for a little bit of, you know, chow mein afterwards, in the days long before internet and Zoom. And now here we are in 2021, in a year that still has the futuristic ring to it. And we are all paying tribute to you from across the country. It's pretty amazing. My apologies that I'm actually not really able to join you live right now, as my sister has chosen to have a milestone birthday on this day. But I want to give you my fondest greetings and my congratulations on this honor that the CCHSBC is bestowing upon you. This is long overdue and so deserving, as I know everyone here agrees with. Now, you do realize that true friends cannot let you get away without a little ribbing. And so I'm going to let Hane explain the rest of this. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ramona. Hello, Paul. Hello, everyone. We just wanted to provide some background to all the many things you've done, Paul. So what we've done is we've arranged, second now, a short presentation, and there we go. Can everybody see that? Yeah, we got a short presentation. The pictures actually you see here are from the poster for Saltwater City, the exhibit. I first met Paul in 1973. You were still in high school then, Paul, of course. And I think it was part of the first Chinese Canadian Youth Conference. You went on to do many, many other things. And I think some people participating today may not realize your very extensive background in as an academic, as an author, as a radio programmer, as an activist, all the above. So what we've done is we've arranged the unauthorized Paul Yee biography quiz. It's multiple choice, and playing along with us. And you know what we need for this? Sarah, a little bit of music. Okay, see if we can get this going. So we have the following questions for people. Multiple choice.
Just going to add, there is a little trigger warning to participants. You know, the following may induce some eye rolling and groans.
Here we go, ready or not. The unauthorized Paul Yee biography quiz. Question number 1. What high school did Paul attend?
Was it A, Spalding, Saskatchewan Secondary? B, the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft? C, he skipped high school and went directly to UBC? Or D, was it Britannia Secondary?
A lot of possibilities there, but I think people do realize it's Britannia Secondary.
And I think a lot of his classmates are watching today.
That was the easy one. Let's try the next question. Paul's high school curricular activities included.
A, was he quarterback for the Britannia Bruins football team? B, was he lead saxophone in the jazz quartet?
I wish.
C, he was the sock hop dance organizer. Or D, he was co-editor of the school annual.
Well, definitely at least D, he was co-editor along with Ray Ma. But who knows, maybe he'd participate in all the above.
I wish.
Paul studied history at UBC because
A, he has a keen interest to learn about the past. B, they were the courses closest to the bus stop. C, he enjoyed very long lectures. Or D, it was about the impact of authors like Marx. That'd be Karl, not Groucho.
You know, it may be all the above. We're not so sure.
Easy one, though.
Let's try the next one. Paul got involved in Pendergai radio because
A, there were many opportunities to meet other Asian activists. B, he always wanted to be a DJ. C, his aunt wanted him out of the house more often. And D, like me, he has a great face for radio.
We'll leave it up to the participants to decide which is the correct answer. Paul did an MA in history at UBC because
A, he didn't pass the LSAT or the MCAT exams. B, UBC history gave him a scholarship. C, destiny awaited his research on early Chinese Canadian businesses. Or was it D, he thought MA meant more Asian?
here's another situation. It could be all the above. Paul got a job at the Vancouver Archives because
A, he had an interest in history and archival preservation. B, it was close to his home in Kitsilano. C, no one else offered him a job. Or was it D, he could practice taiko drumming in the vault after hours? And the answer is?
could be all the above. We don't really know. We'll leave it.
Nobody knows.
Next question. 1988, Paul moved to Toronto because he
A, wanted freezing winters and hot, humid summers. B, he didn't look very good in lemon leggings. C, he wanted to support the second best NHL team in Canada. And D, he wanted Premier Bill Vanderzalm.
I think there's a truth to all of these, especially number D. Okay?
D, exactly.
Next one. Paul became a writer of children's books because
A, he was uncomfortable with big words. B, he likes the pictures and drawings. C, he's a kid at heart. Or D, children are a lot less critical readers than adults. What do you think?
it could be all the above, but D is high up there.
That's my choice.
Next question. Paul used to write 2 books a year, slow it down to 1 a year, and now a book every so often because
A, he's got writer's block. B, he's too busy with other community activities. C, he's slowing down with older age. Or is it D, he's getting enough royalties? Or more likely E, because all of the above except D.
I think it's definitely E.
Yeah, vote for E, everyone.
Next question. Paul loves Vancouver because
This is where he became of age. B, we have the best Chinese restaurants, bar none. C, it's where his family and many longtime friends are. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
And D, all of the above.
I think it's D, all the above.
Definitely.
It's a simple quiz.
Yeah,
All the answers, possible answers are the right answers.
everybody wins.
Okay, we got one last question coming up. During the COVID pandemic, Paul has perfected
A, making sourdough bread.
Nope.
B, 6-hour Netflix binges. C, losing 5 pounds through online exercising. D, gaining back 5 pounds through his home cooking and Mo's home cooking. Or E, he's penned an opera libretto. And the answer is
could be all the above again. We'll leave it up to people. All right. Well, folks, we hope you've enjoyed the unauthorized Paul Yee biography quiz. Ramona and I really enjoyed putting it together. Best wishes from both of us. Ramona.
love you, Paul. Everybody loves you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Really great. I wish I could be funny.
So how many of you aced that quiz?
Paul, did you get all the correct answers to your own biography quiz?
No, I can't remember that far back. It's that old age thing, you know. I can't remember that far back. Thanks.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed that, Paul. I certainly learned a little bit more about you through that quiz.
Yes, it's bringing back a lot of memories. Thank you.
So at this moment, I'm going to ask you, Paul, to share your presentation on the Saltwater City exhibition.
Okay.
We'll also give you a chance to respond to Hana and Ramona if there is anything unauthorized that you felt was added in that quiz.
No. I haven't prepared for that. I thought I was just giving a serious talk here, and you guys are actually having way more fun than I am, and I'm not used to that. I'm just way too serious a guy. So in the meantime, may I please just go ahead and give my standard presentation and get off the screen, please.
That sounds great.
Okay. So do you want me to go from here now?
Sure. We'll ask you to share your slides.
Okay.
And following Paul's presentation, we will be inviting Jeffrey Wong to have a conversation with Paul, and
Right.
Catherine Clement will be moderating a question and answer period. So at that point, we'll invite everyone to turn on your cameras if you're comfortable and join the discussion. But first, we'll hear from Paul.
Okay, so Sarah, are we still on for about 25, 30 minutes from me here?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try this share screen. Okay, yeah, so thanks everybody for being here tonight. I'm delighted to be here to talk a bit about the exhibit. I don't like seeing my own face on the screen, so let's just go straight to the slides. Here we go. What do I have to do? Oh, here we go. Share screen sharing.
You'll want to click slideshow.
Okay, I was looking for that, and hang on, let me get.
You can go to the bottom of the screen.
Bottom of the
You'll
screen.
see bottom of your screen, 4 boxes, and then what looks like an open book, and then the next icon over at the bottom of your window. Or you can go to slideshow on the top menu there too. Over home, keep going. So you see the menus above, it says File, Home, Insert, Design, Transitions, and then one it says Slideshow. There's a couple ways you can do it.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, okay. That's okay. I think you click that. Okay. Now just go to the bottom of your window.
Oh, no, we've got it. There it is, slideshow.
Okay. Yeah, there
Got
you
it.
go.
Got it.
2 ways you can do it. Yeah.
Yep, got it.
Good.
Okay. So I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I recognize that today's topic takes place on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So a bit more on these acknowledgements. I know that today's title, Saltwater City, is yet another example of a settler name imposed on unceded First Nations lands without due respect for the original inhabitants. For myself, I regret this kind of privilege that comes from ignorance. I grew up not knowing the history of the First Nations of Canada, going to university did not address that gap, and now I am dismayed and angry about it. 40 years ago, I was also dismayed and worried that the history of the Chinese in Canada might vanish. I know now that many stories and histories of the First Nations have also not been told, and that these are just as important. I urge that all future projects around Chinese Canadian history to appreciate how they are surrounded by First Nations humanity. Saltwater City. Now, this was a museum exhibit put on in 1986 to help mark Vancouver's 100th birthday. The Chinese Cultural Center of Vancouver sponsored it, and volunteers did all the work from planning to building it. And these 2 points are worth noting. The sponsor was a young nonprofit group based in Chinatown, not a professional museum. And the show was volunteer driven, with hardly any experts from the fields of history or museology. I'd like to start by giving you some background to better understand what was done 35 years ago. Then I'll take you through the show via photographs, mostly black and white. This won't be a history lesson. Instead, it's really a personal reflection on an exhibit attempt about why and what we did back then. And I address some of the limitations we faced. And lastly, I hope to have a chat with all of you folks out there. So, 1986. 1986 was a time of very low awareness of Chinese Canadian history, both inside and outside our community. Back then, there were only 4 books to go to. They tended to have a national or province-wide scope and weren't focused on Vancouver. So in this context, our exhibit had an educational goal based on the show and tell style that was dominant in museums back then, to tell a fuller story of the Chinese in Vancouver. But more on context. Back in 1986, big changes were in the air. 20 years had passed since Canada finally let in Chinese immigrants from around the world, but especially Hong Kong. They came in large numbers and refreshed a shrinking and somewhat rundown Chinatown. Here's the Hong Kong Cafe, run by the longtime pioneer Lum family. But the poster you see here in the window is touting for the Golden Harvest Theater, one of several movie houses that sprang up in Chinatown during the 1970s and 80s. So indeed, immigrants brought new life to Chinatown. Hang on a minute. New life to Chinatown, which made viable the idea of a Chinese Cultural Center. That group, the Cultural Center, in turn sponsored the Saltwater City exhibit. And so you see, we're all connected. Chinatown expanded in the 70s and 80s, and its look changed as stores were turned into shiny, airy supermarkets. Here we see the last days of the Siuli fruits and vegetables on Pender Street. But look to the right up here, and you'll see the site of Jade Palace, the first restaurant in Chinatown to start serving dim sum again to meet the tastes of Hong Kong folk. Yes, new immigrants were prominent, and the older pioneer folks of Saltwater City would give way. And for our planning committee, this was a time to say, yes, the times are changing, but listen, before the earlier generations pass on entirely, we want to say thank you for doing so much over the past century. So one target audience of our show was very much the Chinese community itself. Now, before we go into the show, please note that our exhibit was hardly the first time that Chinatown folk were presenting their own history. At events and festivals of the 1970s and 80s, vintage photos were often put on display. Activists like Hayne Way and Gordy Mark explained our history to the curious, often as part of guided tours of Chinatown, a well-known tradition that continues today. Hayne and Gordy and other people also created slide and audio tape shows that circulated to schools and other interested parties. Back then, it was low tech. Remember Kodak carousel trays and slide projectors and silvery telescoping screens that weighed a ton? Saltwater City. So here we go. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So where did the story of Saltwater City begin? It began in 19th century China. So our show opened with the faces of South China, the 4 counties, the 3 counties, Guangzhou. We put up a detailed map here that of Hoisan County showing the exact village locations of the villages that from where people came from. In the center, at the shipboard mural, you can see peasant clothing, as well as how luggage was carried back then. That last slide showed a water treadle moving irrigation water from one field to another. And such water treadles were brought over and used on farms here in the Fraser Valley. So we saw this as an example of cultural baggage, things carried over from the homeland. Our forebears transported many things from China, including numerous foodstuffs, but we used the treadle because it related to a theme of work and working. Now, earlier, scholars of the Chinese-Canadian past had focused mostly on two topics, anti-Chinese racism and Chinatown's many clan, district, and political organizations. I was kind of interested in a different question as a historian. How did the migrants live day to day and send money home? Well, they managed by finding jobs, by working wherever there was a demand, and by starting businesses, small and big. And so we stressed objects from the world of work throughout Saltwater City, the exhibit. So here's an overview of the exhibit from the second floor gallery. On the lower right, you can see the China Homeland section that we just passed through. From there, and along the bottom, you can see the wall-sized murals that show the Chinese railway workers of the 19th century. Vancouver, of course, had a special tie to the CPR because its port was the western end of the National Railroad, and the city's modern history began only when the tracks were finished. So here you see the size of the exhibit, which filled a hall big as a basketball court. And this challenged our committee from the very start. Could we fill this hall? Were there enough artifacts that we could find and put on display? We had no idea what we might or might not find. So after the railway scene, our theme of work and working went into the salmon industry. By the year 1900, there were some 40 canneries running along the Fraser River near Vancouver, and 3/4 of those crews were Chinese. Now, this was seasonal work, not long-term, so workers had to find work to cover the rest of the year. Lucky for us, one of the leading historians of the salmon industry, Duncan Stacy, helped us find items for display: tin cans, trays, labels, nets, crates, and of course, the all-impressive iron chink. This iron chink was an industrial machine that was invented to replace Chinese workers at canneries to bring down the owner's costs. And maybe now's a good time to talk about artifacts. Saltwater City was a show centered around artifacts. It was the availability of objects that determined what story we would tell. What? Once Duncan Stacy confirmed that we could borrow an iron chink, we developed a scene around it. And 35 years ago, I think our use of artifacts sent a message relevant to the low awareness of Chinese Canadian history. And our message was this: look, these artifacts, these precious objects that are on display here, they are proof, solid proof that Chinese people lived and worked here. And in the same way that mainstream museums want to preserve these things, these people ought not be forgotten. So our work and working theme showed large-scale photos of people on the job, but we wanted to flesh them out further because these so-called bachelors who lived and worked here while their families waited across the ocean in China were the backbone of the early community. So here, in this scene that we developed, we tried to show how they might have lived, poorly housed, with a pot-bellied stove, few belongings, but on the table, things that helped them get through life. Books to read, patent medicines to ease pain and illness, card games to pass the time. This scene was weak on compelling artifacts. We knew that we could never really portray those true living conditions as this photo from an actual Chinatown boarding house shows down here in the bottom right. So next, we looked at work inside early Chinatown, which had a bustling economy of its own. And one kind of manufacturing sewed clothing. The Wong family of modernized tailors helped set up this display of tools, cloth, and clothing and advertisements. Now, modernized tailor came from an early tradition of merchant tailors, where seamsters churned out workers' clothing, such as underwear, pajamas, and heavy-duty pants and shirts, as well as uniforms for store clerks, restaurant workers, and kitchen staff that were sold throughout the city. And this is because the mainstream stores and wholesalers throughout Vancouver came to Chinatown to buy these manufactured goods because this way they avoided paying the cost of shipping them all the way from Eastern Canada. So here's another overhead view of the show, showing how the show was laid out. It was done very simply. There were just two corridors. On the right was one corridor that took you through the China section, the railway workers, the salmon cannery, and the bachelor room down here on the right. At the end of that corridor, you turned the corner and then you saw the beginning of Chinatown with modernized tailor. After it, you passed a goldsmith shop that we set up. And then on the lower right, it was the office of Gordon Kamyao, the first Chinese Canadian notary public. On the lower left is our reminder of the infamous 1907 anti-Asiatic riot. We noted anti-Chinese racism throughout the exhibit at various points. In the railway scene, we mentioned that after the railway tracks were laid, Ottawa imposed the first head tax to stop Chinese immigrants. In the cannery scene, the iron chink featured the derogatory name used on Chinese people. And Gordon Kamyao's story is instructive. He studied law, but the BC Law Society wouldn't let any Chinese practice law. So he became a notary public. But even then, the Law Society said that his work could only be limited to Chinatown. So Our last piece on work and working looked at Chinese farming and the fresh vegetables that helped feed Vancouver. These large murals that we had showed the chain of activity that started on the left-hand side in the fields of Richmond or the Musqueam lands. Moving to the right of the fields was a view of the outdoor wholesale market, where farmers, Chinese farmers, brought their produce to the city to be sold to retailers or wholesalers. Chinese-run grocery stores, as this scene shows, were found throughout the city, and the busiest ones sold fresh produce. Now, white store owners resented them greatly and lobbied City Hall to cut down the number of hours that they could stay open. We were lucky to borrow from the BC Transportation Museum a vintage truck of the same kind that Chinese peddlers used to take vegetables to sell door to door, or that Chinese farmers used to transport their fresh produce into the city. Once again, once we knew that the truck was available to us, we built a scene around it. And this was the third of our major artifacts, which included the water treadle and the iron chink. And so our other large pieces were the 1936 Golden Jubilee Arch and the 1950s living room, but they weren't really artifacts. They were more installations. Chinatown, of course, had a long, complex history of clan, district, and political groups, and our exhibit paid tribute to them by showing their fancy furniture, their group photographs, their VIP portraits, including Dr. Sun Yat-sen here, who visited Vancouver, and all the various parade regalia that filled the streets with noise and color on special days. I'd like to say here that the Saltwater City exhibit also came from a very strong sense of community. It was the Chinese Cultural Center that sponsored the show, and the show's core committee members had been Cultural Center volunteers for many years, doing festivals, sitting on the board, running programs, raising funds. Now, the Culture Center needed to acquire land and gain public support for buildings that would anchor, that they hoped would anchor the region's Chinese population in the historic Chinatown. So back then, all of our volunteer efforts were aimed at community building. You needed a community before you could have the building. So, moving along in the exhibit, now we face the middle of our story in the time after the pioneers, after the pioneer workers, and before the ending in the so-called modern era of the 1980s. And here in the middle, the linear story fell apart. We had started in China, from where people came to work here and to set up a life despite local hostility. The middle section got complicated. Threads of many people and many events flowed through Saltwater City, threads that weren't tied to work and working. We couldn't address all these threads. An exhibit isn't the best platform to deal with complexity. So we made choices. The practical question, of course, was, what artifacts do we have? So here we have opera costumes from UBC's Museum of Anthropology. We have the Chinese wedding gown of Victoria Lore, who married Mr. Queen Yip. And on the right here is the official portrait of the Chinese soccer team, who were heroes to all of Chinatown, and Queen Yip was the team's star. So why did we choose these items? Well, this was history on two fronts. We showed ties to China through the opera costumes and the wedding croix, and we showed evolution as Western sports, such as soccer, became popular in Chinatown. A question for our show was, so how exactly do you do community building through history? When Sarah Ling, the president of the Historical Society, asked me for this talk, my reaction was, no, Sarah, I don't think I can do it. I don't remember that far back. I don't have my files here in Toronto. I just can't remember. But when I began seeing the photos that you've been seeing of the exhibit, I began to recall. So back then, we thought that if we could show things that sparked people's recall of past events, then that was a way of sharing, and that was a way of community building. And Chinatown, of course, overflowed with memorable events. The Chinese soccer team won trophies, and in 1936, the Chinese community toasted Vancouver's 50th birthday by importing this grand award-winning arch from Hong Kong. Our planning group saw this photo and said, wouldn't it be fabulous if we could rebuild this arch for the show? Way too expensive. So we did the next best thing. We asked architect David Wong to build us his version of the arch. And this is what you see here on the right. And it was his idea to make this the one interactive part of the exhibit where visitors could pose for photos with Grace Kwan, the Chinatown Jubilee Queen, and Shirley Temple, the famous American child actress who came to visit us in 1936. Here are some other artifacts that we use to trigger memories about the 1930s and 1940s. Two things stood out about that period. The Canadian-born generation came to the forefront. And when China's war with Japan started in 1937, then everyone helped raise funds for the war effort over some 9 years. So we showed a model of the full-size single-seat airplane that Robert Wong built in his family's apartment in Market Alley, right in Vancouver's Chinatown. Robert here was 17 when he built it, and he flew it in 1937. And then in World War II, Robert trained pilots, and later he ran a flying school in Toronto. We also honored the soldiers who went to fight for Canada, because when men and women enlisted for the Canadian forces, they were saying to Canada, we are willing to die for this country, and yet you still won't let us vote? For the 1950s and 60s, we mounted a middle-class Chinese-Canadian living room. And this represented the desire of community people to enjoy life just like fellow Canadians, a life that was safe, comfortable, and up to date. We showed objects found in typical homes of that period, including bicultural items such as Chinese figurines and Chinese opera LP records. Earlier, I said that 1986 saw low awareness of local history. Well, you know, that same problem affected our planning committee. We only knew what the history books said. We had no time to do new research. Back then, hardly anyone at the universities here was doing Chinese Canadian history, totally unlike the many initiatives that people like Professor Henry Yu are driving forward today. So today, now, we know that the big story of the 1950s and 60s was the arrival and growth of the reunified families, which was when Ottawa slowly let Chinese residents here sponsor their wives and children to enter Canada, which started another generation of Canadian-born Chinese. Our living room scene kind of fit that story which was very much about families, about working parents wanting to buy houses in better neighborhoods away from Chinatown where they could raise their children. As a kid in the 1960s, I remember seeing the Chinese girls drill team in many parades on Hastings Street. And I was thrilled because the team was so out there, marching down the street away from Chinatown, yet still clearly a part of Chinatown by their name and costumes. Now, the drill team was one of many symbols of improving race relations in the city. In the 60s, white Vancouverites came to Chinatown for dining and nightclubbing. Mainstream politicians came in search of votes. Chinese Canadians could work in the professions of their choice. In 1971, Canada announced multiculturalism. So anti-Chinese racism was certainly not as bad as before World War II. So we ended the Saltwater City exhibit on an optimistic note. In paying tribute to the pioneer generations, we wanted them to see that their work and sacrifices had not been in vain. They had invested in the future, and the 1980s seemed to show much promise. Of course, today we know differently. So here's the final section of the exhibit where we cover the 1970s and 80s. We featured a gallery of recent Chinese immigrants from South Africa, India, South America, Southeast Asia. We were still doing basic education, wanting people to stop seeing the Chinese community as one monolith where everybody was the same. By 1986, some Chinese people spoke no Chinese, other Chinese spoke no English. Chinese people could speak Spanish, Vietnamese, Hindi, whatever. They belonged to different political parties. Indeed, for many years, a faction in Chinatown kept attacking the Chinese Cultural Center for being too friendly to the People's Republic of China. So you can see that we're racing through the final 20 years of Saltwater City's story, because the exhibit really was focused on the earlier history and the pioneers. And so we're back to community building here, showing the issues that brought people out to fight for the causes of the 70s and the 80s. People didn't want Chinatown demolished for freeways. See the aluminum foil containers? People were lobbying against health regulations that threatened the viability of Chinese barbecued meat. People raged against the W5 TV program. Young people called out a nightclub for raising the cover charge on Chinese customers because Chinese people allegedly didn't drink as much as white customers. And many of these stories were, of course, covered by Pendergai Radio, a platform for new voices. I said earlier that the exhibit very much wanted to honor and pay tribute to the pioneers of Saltwater City while they were still alive. I think we succeeded. We had senior members of the community, like these folks from Todd Wong's family, drop in and enjoy the show. Although the exhibit was dismantled and all the borrowed artifacts returned to their owners, Saltwater City did live on a bit longer in two films, one a documentary and another kind of story film about a young girl who discovers her heritage and her future at the exhibit. And we did this, of course, with more help from people in the community. Charlie Ungerleider from UBC came down and pushed that film ahead for us. As well, as you all know, the base story for the exhibit was developed as a book, which was first published in 1988 and then updated and reissued in 2006. And here we are, your committee members on opening night, taken at the entrance to the show. You will recognize stalwarts of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society of BC here. David Wong, the architect, Hein Wei, Elwin She, the all-round sound and video whiz, and Ray Ma, our designer, is front and center as he deserves to be. You know, they say that every generation writes its own history. If we assume one generation is about 20 years, then almost 2 generations have passed since the 1986 Saltwater City exhibit. And I am very pleased that the newly formed Chinese Canadian Museum will be taking up that task, and I extend my best wishes to them. To finish, I want to thank you all for listening to me blab on, and I thank the CCHSBC for inviting me here tonight. I thank Elwin She in particular for giving me helpful advice on how to light myself for the Zoom camera when natural daylight isn't available here in Toronto, where it's almost 11 p.m. So now I'm going to close the slideshow and go back to join the host of this Zoom. Stop share. Okay, there.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's Catherine Clement. And I think it's a very nice segue that you made for me, which when you were talking about one generation to the next, and how much we leave something for the next generation. I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. I'm not too sure why. Anyway. So I'd like to introduce to everyone this evening a good friend of mine. His name is Jeffrey Wong. He's with the Wong Benevolent Association. Jeffrey was an SFU student, and he had an assignment, I believe he told me one day, where he went to the Wong's Benevolent Association for a school assignment, and basically he never left. And within a few short years, he became the vice president of the association, and then also started to become their chief archivist, sort of recognizing the value of these hundreds of documents and photos and things stuffed into closets, and the value they had for their history and the importance of saving them, because a lot of them had wound up in dumpsters. He became very good at picking locks and going into cupboards, and has really kindly always shown me things and taken photos and sent me, look what I found. And so I think it's really appropriate this evening, Paul, after the work that you've done, is that we have Jeffrey come on, and he'd like to share with you some of the things that he has discovered at the Wong Association. And we're really trying to encourage him, because to us, he's that next generation that carries on this legacy of preserving and sharing stories. So welcome to Jeffrey, and we'll have him present and then some conversation, then we'll open it up in about 20 minutes to our visitors to ask any questions of either of you. So go for it.
Thank you, Catherine. I didn't realize I'd be called out for picking locks at the Wongs, but I guess there we go. My secret is out. But yeah, so I've been part of the Wongs for the past 5 to 6 years now. And as Catherine has said, that I started while trying to write a paper for my SFU class, and without understanding that I had any connection to the building at all. But when I first went there, the elders that I came in contact with asked me for my name and which village I came from, which at that time I had no clue. I didn't even know I was from Toisan. But just talking to them, asking for my grandfather's name, I came to realize that my grandfather was a member, and he actually was a part of the organization and went often. And even through talking to him even more, I realized that he was my great grand uncle was the building manager for the space. So it was quite the shock. And then I started to get to know him a little bit better. And then the elders started to tell me stories about my grandfather and my granduncle. So I just started to get to know them. And slowly, I started to ask these elders some questions. And ever since, I've been trying to document their stories. So yeah. Lyra, is the presentation up? Okay, cool. Yes, just a brief history of the Wongs, but I think we could skip that. And then, so yeah, so this is the hall space, and my elders would show me this space at first, and I just fell in love with the space. It was built in 1923, and everything is an original. And in the room right next door, there's a really large archival room that is full of old photos and old documents and artifacts that have been left there ever since. They used to call it a storage room until some very historically minded members decided to take some time and organize it. And so, yeah, so now we have this, thanks to them, we have this large collection of archival material. And so my job since has been kind of documenting it, but also collecting stories from my elders. This is Uncle Tim, one of the elders that I kind of mentor under. And he is I would call him our grand historian. He knows everything about our association, and he joined in 1952 or 53 when he came to Canada, and has been part of the Hansing Athletic Club. And then later on in his age, he started to volunteer for his elder and was the secretary of the Wong's Association back then. And so just following him, getting to know the archives, getting to know the stories, trying to record him whenever I can, whenever he's comfortable with some stories that he may know. And then also following the stuff that he knows about the ancestral worship, the cultural practices that we do at the club. So ancestral worship, sometimes funerals, other things like that, participating in the rituals, like the ancestor worship at the Qingming and the spring festivals, our anniversaries. We all do this grand ceremony that we do every year. Yeah, so with that, there's also that, and then there's also as Catherine has mentioned, the closets, the many closets that we have filled with stuff, and just prying them open and finding old photos that are in like suitcases or just boxes, random boxes underneath a desk. And sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming because you don't really know where to start. But with help from volunteers like Catherine came once to help scan. We digitize some of the photos to start off with. And I have some photos like our conventions, our national conventions from our buildings from 1934 and 1945. These are our national conventions. They have one every 7 years. And then in modern times with Wong's Benevolent Association, we have one every 4 years. Yes. And then the next photo would be this one I just recently found, which is in a very fascinating one of the Wong's Women's Lion Dance Committee in 1939 to fundraise for the war effort in China. And we have plenty of photos of Hansing when with male lion dancers, but I've never seen one with female lion dancers. So just trying to dig through material now to kind of know these stories, and while the elders are still around, to catch their stories of how this group came to be. And then there's also the basketball team. This is Hansing's basketball team back in 1969. And Hansing is still an athletic club that's still around with a bunch of youth. And they had a basketball team, a volleyball team, a drama club, and a music division. And then we also have photos from our Mun Kerng school. We have operated a language school for a really long time that predominantly taught Chinese. And this is an unknown year photo done by Yu Cho Chow of our classroom with the famous principal in the middle, Mr. Wong Kong Fao. And I think they were publishing a book at that time. So yes, so, and then just some photos. Yeah, just some photos of the classroom. I'm wrapping up to your life there, Paul.
Thank you.
Yes, you'll see in a bit, but yeah, so these are just some school life photos of the kids. And then as every year we have a traditional graduation photo. And this is the graduation class of 1970. And as you can see, you can spot out young Mr. Paul Yee. How old were you there, Paul?
14.
14? Oh, wow. But even before that, there's a photo of you in the famous picnics, which is there.
Ah, yes.
Yes. Do you remember being there? You don't look very happy being there. It must have been very hot.
Yeah, everybody had to sit really still, but yeah, great picnic.
What's it? What was your memories of the school, of your lifetime being in the school?
Well, I had, my memories are not the greatest because I spent about 10 years going to Chinese school. My family was very forceful about me learning Chinese. So I started when I was in probably age 5, going to Chinese kindergarten there, and kept going to that Chinese school until I was in high school in grade 8. So it was a long haul for me. And as most kids of my generation, I did not appreciate having to go to Chinese school. I did not like having to learn Chinese. But I survived. I got through it, and I'm grateful to this very day because I am still able to read and write Chinese thanks to those early efforts. So Montclair holds a very special place in my heart, and my connection to the Wong is that my mother was a Wong, so that's why I went to the school.
Yeah, because I've noticed in the recent Vancouver Archives funds that you have a lot of photos of the Wongs and also of Wong Gong-hei. And I was wondering what was your connection with him, because Gong-hei was the long-serving president of the Wongs in the 40s. So I was just very curious to see, what was Paul Yee's connection?
Well, the funny thing is that you know more about my uncle than I do, because Wong Gong-hei was my uncle. I came to live with him when I was about 3 years old because my parents had passed away in Saskatchewan. So he was my maternal uncle, and he and his Canada wife raised me and my brother. But there was a huge gap in our age, because when I came as a child of 3 into his house, my uncle, Wong Gong-hei, was already in his late 60s, 70s. So although he was the head of the household that raised me, I didn't know him. We hardly spoke. I certainly listened to him more than I spoke. I was probably terrified of him because of this great discrepancy in our age and all of that. And so I grew up knowing about the Wong's Association, going to many events at Hon Sing and all of that. But when I became active in Chinatown, those things I actually kind of left behind, because in the 70s it was the Chinese Culture Center that was the main draw for a new generation of young people to get involved in Chinatown.
Yeah, I see. But when you went back afterwards for the Saltwater City, I noticed you've interviewed a lot of the elders in the community, especially like the principal Wong Kong Fao. And
Wong Kong Fao was very special because he was a really good friend of my uncle's. I remember When my uncle passed away, Wang Kongfa was the very first person to come to give condolences to my aunt. He was the very, very first person. He rushed there. And so Wang Kongfa, was a very good friend of my uncle's. And when I was doing Saltwater City, the book, I wanted to interview him because I knew that he was a very dedicated teacher. And he was also a very unique person because during the years of exclusion, he was one of the very few Chinese able to enter Canada because he was really a teacher. He qualified as one of the classes that was allowed during exclusion. So in that case, he was a very precious specimen. But my main question to Wang Kongfa when I interviewed him was, you know, Hoisan is the main language of the Chinatown community, yet in the school, we're being taught Cantonese. So how do we jive? I mean, how does that jive? Especially in the earlier period when Hoisan is much more dominant than Cantonese. And I remember we had a conversation during that interview. So that was my interest, my particular interest with Wang Kongfa.
And what was it like to talk to them? Because from my experience interviewing elders, it's actually very hard to pry anything out of them. So
it is hard. It is hard. And I have to confess that when I was doing interviews for Saltwater City, the book, I was very careful not to mislead people to think that I was writing a book to include long chunks of their story. That wasn't going to happen. Paragraphs of their story to include in this massive 100-year-long book. So I interviewed people very carefully and asked very specific questions that I knew I could put into the book. I didn't make any false promises. I didn't dare make false promise to say, yeah, you're gonna be in the book in a big way. So the interviews went very easily that way, I think, because I didn't ask for a person's whole story. I just asked I explained what I was doing. I explained my particular interest in that person's expertise, and that's all I stuck to. So it was very good.
Interesting. And I also noticed in your slide that there was a few photos from like the clan, as you said, there are some artifacts from the clans. And like from where we come from the Wongs, a lot of the stuff we don't allow outside of our building. So was it very difficult for you to actually get those artifacts to for the saltwater exhibit?
Well, we were very lucky because the executive director at the Chinese Culture Center at that time was a fellow named John Wong Guokzhong, and he of course belonged to the association, and he was our entree into borrowing the school desks from Munkerong, which we put on the show, as well as the photographs and things. So back then in the 1970s and 80s, approaching clan associations was something Canadian-born Chinese like me didn't dare to do because we didn't speak the right language, we didn't know the right people. So we went through the people we did know, which in our case was John Wong, and he borrowed the stuff for us. That's how it was done then. So you, Jeffrey, you're in a really lucky, good place to be actually inside the associations looking at stuff on those premises. That was just unimaginable for me back then.
Now that's getting really spooky because John Wong is my uncle, like my blood uncle. So
Wong Guokzhong?
Yeah, Wong Guokzhong is my uncle. I have to ask him next time I give him a call.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, I have to talk to him about this. He doesn't really talk much about his life. Again, this thing about asking prying stories out of elders. He doesn't really talk much about his life at the CCC or the CBA.
Is he still a photographer though?
Yes, he does. He still goes out and takes a lot of photos, and he visits the Wongs once in a while. But he's really enjoying his retirement life.
Yeah, no, he's a great photographer. You know,
Mhm.
give him my regards.
Okay, yeah, of course. And my last question is: have you ever visited any type of the school or the Wong since the time of your school days?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. But the pictures that you showed bring back those memories, and indeed, those are the original furniture. I remember them very, very vividly.
Well, yeah. Since I don't know if you know, but since then it closed in 2011, and we've partnered with the Youth Collaborative to restart the class.
Mhm.
And it's mainly language based, Cantonese based again.
Great.
Trying to bring it back, and we take the classic photo, like the classic graduation photo, like you do,
Yeah.
like you did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is trying to continue on the tradition as usual, but also like collecting just connecting the stories with the present day, and yeah, just connecting with youth.
Yeah, no, you're really lucky to be in your position, Jeffrey, to be working right on the Wongs Association, because I mean the Wongs were, I think, the largest clan and certainly one of the wealthiest clans in Vancouver. They were powerful. They were very powerful, and certainly the number of sub-organizations they had testified to, you know, their ability and, you know, dedication to the community. It's a great lineage to come from.
Yeah. Just sometimes figuring out how, like, documenting my term is one thing, but we also have the Hansing Athletic Club that there's a fascinating history there too, with many divisions within the club itself, like athletics and music and drama.
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, there's still a very active athletic club today with the line dance group and the dragon dance and the martial arts. So just trying to collect the stories to present day, but also with the new Chinese Canadian Museum that we now have on the ground floor of the Hansing building. Just trying to figure out how to present it like you did with the Saltwater City exhibit.
Well, the thing that amazes me about what you do is that you're sort of, I mean, for me, back when I was active in Chinatown, the traditional associations were just like off limits to us, because there seemed to be this barrier between the Canadian-born Chinese and the traditional organizations. There was just no crossover. But here you are, you're right in the middle of it, right in the thick of things. So do you see that there's going to be a larger role for Canadian-born Chinese in these traditional Chinese associations?
Yeah, for sure. There's a large swell of young people, millennials that are coming back to Chinatown and getting connected with their roots, and also like the Wongs, for example, through these other activities that we do, we get like young people, like for me, my cousin Ainsley, village cousin Ainsley, she's getting involved in helping with the clan, getting involved with the events, learning their culture, learning the language again. So I definitely see it, and the elders have seen these associations are desperate in need for youth. So they are very welcome to teach us and guide us into learning about these associations.
So Jeffrey, can I ask what's your biggest challenge you're facing right now, and if Paul might be able to provide some advice to you? Can't hear you.
The main thing, one of the major things is youth. We definitely need more hands on deck, so just to help out. And second, again, is just figuring out, for me, is figuring out these oral histories and trying to get the elders to kind of be more comfortable with me interviewing them. I've noticed in conversation, they're great, but the moment I turn on a video camera or turn on a recorder, they just, nothing.
So Jeffrey, what's
I've learned
the,
off. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to know, actually, to both of you, Catherine and Jeffrey, in your exploration of the materials at the Wong Association, what's the thing, what's one or two things that have really leapt out at the two of you? Like, what's really just grabbed you? Like, wow. Because I'm so curious about this organization because of my own roots in it. I just love to know what's grabbed you from it.
Catherine, you want to spoil our project?
Oh,
Catherine.
That's his latest break-in that we found.
Yes.
We have, well, I would say that one of the things I love is that when Jeffrey shows me these photos and we scan them at super high resolution, so we can go in and see incredible detail, like within those large photos of the conventions. They just look like a bunch of people. But then you start zooming in and you find all these little secret things and people peeking out and just interesting, even light fixtures I find that I'm really interested in. But Jeffrey, it's interesting, Jeffrey and I have together found almost like two sides of a story. And it was a story that a veteran had told me about some really early memories of himself around he's 6 or 7. So it's kind of the memories of a 6-year-old, little snapshots, nothing really with a lot of context. And Jeffrey found the actual answer in the Wong Association. It's about this knock 'em out, drag 'em out court case between a Chinese couple that the Wongs helped bankroll on one side, and which made newspaper headlines in 1931. It's the middle of the Depression. It's the Wong Association essentially against this one woman who's like 25 years old in an unhappy marriage with a gambler and a drinker and wants out of it with her kids. And but he just discovered more things again. But what don't you just tell them the little story about the desk?
Yeah, the desk that I normally sit on at the Wongs, there's just so much stuff in it that I don't really have time to actually look through it. And there's always been a drawer that I'm very curious because there's a lock on it. But so I didn't pick the lock, I just broke it. So, but yeah, I pulled it out, and the first letter that I found, it was just stuffed with letters and papers that I didn't really care much for. So I was about to push it back, but it slowly occurred to me that I think I was sitting on Foon Zin's desk. Oh. Yeah, where he was sitting, because all the court letters were addressed to him, and just coincidentally, the first couple of letters were pertaining to this case from the lawyer. So it's just fascinating that just picking out these little stories of these people that I've always heard of, but I never really got to know. But along with this story, I also discovered a man called Jim Goon Wong. And he's kind of like more or less forgotten now, but back in the day, apparently he was named the king of the thugs in Chinatown. And he was a very, very, very important member of the Wongs, and I'm still trying to dig out a little more information about him. So that's the things I really, really enjoy doing, is kind of peeling the onion.
So we should turn it over to questions from the participants, our guests tonight. I don't know, I think Christy, you're going to help me with if there's any questions that people want to ask of Paul or of Jeffrey while we have this rare opportunity to ask Paul. Maybe Paul, I'll start off. It just occurs to me, like I've done exhibition design, I've done books. And I cannot believe you went from an exhibition to film and then to a book. I can't imagine how all-consuming Saltwater City in one form or another was for you. And I'm not surprised you moved to Toronto after that. You had enough of this place. But how, between the time that you began or the genesis of the idea till you were finished, all that kind of trilogy of items, how long was that period of time?
It was remarkably short, actually, because I remember it was 1985. I was at the Powell Street Festival when Brenda Chow from the Cultural Center said, next year for Centennial, we'd like to do an exhibit. So we literally had 1 year from August to August, because the exhibit opened in October of '86, to do all of the research, finding artifacts, design. The whole thing was done in a year of just getting to the show. So that was the show. And then after the show, I took a leave of absence from work for 6 months just to finish all the research for the book, to flesh out all the missing chunks of the book, because as I said, the exhibit didn't cover everything, but the book had to be more comprehensive. So I spent 6 months doing the added research, and wrote the book. And so by then, 2 years later, the manuscript was in. But the film stuff was actually, I didn't have to worry about the 2 films because other people stepped in. So as long as I was able to hand off the research stuff, there were other people moving the documentary film project along. They knew how to do it. They just wanted to go through the exhibit. I didn't really have to do much. So it was really because other people came along and helped, that just put out all this extra time and energy, because this exhibit seemed so striking to them, and everybody seemed reluctant to see it come down. It was just like, oh, it's gonna end, isn't it?
I want to thank you for that. I never was here for that exhibition, but when I came back to Vancouver, I heard so much about it. And it was actually your book that brought me back to the mothership of Chinatown. And I learned so much from it, things that were never communicated to me about my own history on my Chinese side. There's a question here from Charles Ungerlater, I think.
Oh, yes. Hey, Charles.
And he can ask it. Actually, Sarah, were we okay with people asking their own questions?
Sure, they're welcome to.
So Charles, if you could unmute yourself, why don't you ask the question?
Hi, Paul. Thanks very much for the
Charles.
presentation. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
I have a question for you and for Jeffrey. As historians and archivists, if you were mounting an equivalent exhibit in 2025, what would you use as the dominant theme?
I would hesitate to answer that question simply because I've been away from Vancouver for the last 30 years, and I think that disqualifies me from really commenting on Vancouver's history, more recent history. It's too much of a gap. So I beg leave to withdraw and to back off from that question. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Oh no. I would probably say with Chinatown, although there's a lot of change that's happened in the neighborhood, there's also continuality. So I'm speaking of this from a clan, from within my clan, and just observing Chinatown, part of participating in some of the events and whatnot. But it's always been the youth learning from the elders, and then passing it back down. And then we gather these stories, these oral traditions and stories, and then we try to pass it down to our next generation. And that might be my answer.
Well, thank you both. I wanted to just say that Paul minimized his agency around the journey through Saltwater City. I don't know if you remember, Paul, but you wrote the script for that particular project. I think we did it together, but you did most of it, actually.
I don't remember. Thank you. Thank you for recalling that for me.
We have a question from Jim Holgate. Jim, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Jim?
Yeah, I just had a fairly simple question, like to Jeffrey. How much time do you sort of spend on this? It looks like it's a really big, involved project. Like, are you spending all your waking hours doing it?
Yeah. There's other things that the association, like being a member of the association, we have to manage. So like building work and whatnot. But I do try to get to it. It is one of my passions. So I do get to it as much as I can. And sometimes I do have to do some of the work at home. But I would say once a week, anytime I can, if the elders don't really feel like talking that day, I could sneak off and do some scanning. But most of the time would be having to deal with the association business itself. And this archival work is most of my private life at home afterwards.
Yeah, that's why I get emails from you at all times.
Yes. Frantic emails sometimes in the middle of the afternoon when I pry open a cabinet and I realize there's some 100-year-old stuff in there and I don't know what to do with it.
Exactly. We have time for one last question, and I've got two. Well, actually, I have two here. One from Carolyn, and then Richard Wong, and then we'll have to close it off. So, Carolyn, do you want to go first?
Hi, Paul. Haven't seen you for a long time.
Hi, Carolyn.
I shared a desk at Munkyung with Paul when I was 10 and he was like 7 years old. So we go back a long ways. When you were researching Saltwater City, and Jeffrey, when you are dealing with the clan associations or the Wong Association, Paul, did you ever talk to anybody from the other clans, and do they share information, or do they share stories at all, or did they in the past, or do they now?
Sorry, I missed the question. There was a glitch. There's something.
Oh, I was wondering when you were doing your book, whether you had approached any of the other clan associations in Vancouver. So the other surnames, the Maz. And I gathered, I met someone at the Military Museum's gala that was the president, and he's a young guy, not from Vancouver originally, but he's the president of the Lu Association. I happened to sit next to him, and I've never been down to the Lu Association, and I'd like to actually research more, but I don't even know how to approach any of this. Mm-hmm. And Jeffrey, I don't know if the associations actually deal with each other, or do they share information? Or Catherine, do you communicate with all the different ones that are in town?
How about we let Paul go and answer first?
Yeah. How about Paul?
What I actually did very little research on clan associations for the book. And that was because when I was doing my research, at that time, in the historiography on Chinese Canadians, I felt that there had been a lot written about the functions and roles of traditional Chinese associations. And my work, when I was researching, was really around work. I was more interested in finding out the economic contributions of the Chinese in Vancouver. All the work on clan associations had been looked at by sociologists, anthropologists, and many, many historians. So when I was starting out to research history, I was actually very resentful of all the attention that those academics had spent on the associations. It was as if the Chinese had gone abroad to set up associations. I didn't get a sense that they were doing any work. And so when I was writing and researching, I was doing that in reaction to that earlier academic focus on those groups. And that was because people from outside the community saw the associations as a very visible part of the community, as something very distinctively Chinese that they could explore. They weren't interested in working class history or economic history. They were interested in, well, how are the Chinese keeping Chinese traditions alive in Canada? And the associations were one of those avenues of writing. So that's where my twist moved me in a certain direction.
Jeffrey, do you want to add to that? And then we'll just go on to Richard Wong's question.
Yeah, to answer the question about do we as clans communicate with each other? Yes, we do. There's a surface level interaction with each other where we invite each other to our parties and banquets and whatnot. There's also the CBA, that is the overarching association that collects us together when there's an issue in the community or anything else. For the Wongs, there's also, and other clans, there's also traditional ties between other associations. So for the Wongs, for example, we're cousins with the Ings. So we're closely tied to the Ings, and back in the olden days, even the Chans and the Lims. So there's some connection there too that we keep in contact with.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll do the last question, which is Richard Wong. Richard, can you unmute yourself, please? Then we'll close off.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. I don't know whether you can still remember me or not. Way back almost 45 years ago, when we first met in the Asian Study Common Study Room in Buchanan, second floor. We have mutual classmate, brother of Susanna Sito.
Oh, yes, Robert.
Yes.
I remember Robert, yes.
Yes. But anyhow, thank you. Congratulations. You've done a great job for our community and not only preserve, and you really help us to uncover so much history. We all would like to learn and know more, want to know more. So please continue what you love and at the same time benefit our community, not only in Vancouver, but throughout Canada, maybe even across the Pacific, anyhow, where we came from, you know, our ancestor. So keep up the great job, man, and okay? And also, Jeffrey, I didn't realize that you are nephew of John. John had been a very good friend with me since I ever been in Vancouver. When he have his own shop, probably right down at the Wong's building. And I can tell you, he had been a very artistic photographer. I don't know whether you know or not. He started the Chinese, you know, photography club. Very, very beautiful photos. When you see him, say hello for me. And you keep up the great work. You know, the most challenging thing in our Chinese Canadian community in every city and province is one similar thing. They cannot attract young people back to Chinatown, especially their clan organization. You know, we are lucky the Wongs, you know, have someone like you and Ashley and so on. And in Toronto, I think, Paul, you know that Wong is quite developed in Chinatown in Toronto. They have several buildings there. And also because they have been sort of taken care by the young professional group. So I would like to, when the Ma asked me, what is the most challenging thing? I told them is how you can attract young generation. Any organization without young generation, without young blood, there will be no future. So keep on anyhow. So I just want to add a couple of things. Even though Wong is a clan organization, but 84 years ago, as the honored chair of Hon Sing, I would like to share with you, Hon Sing is I think, one of the very few clan organization. They open up the door to all different clans, different surname. Even right now, like Danny Kwan, you know, under the grandmaster of Peter Wong, you know, with many hundreds of Kung Fu students, they are from different surnames anyhow. And also, I don't know whether you are aware or not, Chinese Cultural Center. The idea of starting the Chinese Cultural Center, I don't know you are aware of that or not, is through one of the Wong banquet. At that time, the head man, I mean, the leader was Mr. Quan Wong, the first notary, Chinese notary public, or something like that, anyhow, among the top, the first one. His good friend, university classmate, was Alex McDonald. At that time was the Attorney General. And then he invited then the premier, Dave Barrett. And then they sit next to each other. And then Dave premier asked Mr. Quan Wong, the Italian have the cultural center. How come the Chinese don't have cultural center? Because that one question. And then Mr. Quan Wong said, if we organize, will you support us? He said, yes. That is how the Chinese Cultural Center was started from the Wong's banquet. I just want to share with you. And that's why the first chair of the Cultural Center was Mr. Wong Ding Nam. I think at that time was the governor of, or chancellor of Simon Fraser University, I believe. So that is the little history I would like to share with you anyhow. But all in all, keep up the great work. Sarah Ling, you've done a great job anyhow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for that piece of history. And Paul and Jeffrey, I wanted to thank you both. I hope this is the start of a really beautiful, long friendship between you two. We need to give Jeffrey support. He's kind of, he has Ainsley, but he's basically doing all of this on his own and occasionally asking me questions. But Paul, you have so much valuable experience. And thank you for what you've contributed and left to all of us, this couple generations behind you. I'd like to now turn it back over to Sarah because I think they're having raffle prizes so we can wrap up this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also wanted to thank you, Paul. And I don't know if you've been following the busy chat box, but there's certainly been an outpouring of gratitude to you and certainly a lot of memories that you brought back and flashbacks for those that have worked with you many moons ago, but also for those of us who are newer to the community. I think one thing you said that really stuck out was that this is all about building a community, and there's no sense in seeking after something tangible like a building if we don't start with a strong community. So on behalf of our board, I'd like to thank you for the strong sense of community that you paved, and even though you're in Toronto, you're still very much a part of our community, and it's great to see you forming new relationships like your new friend Jeffrey here. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
We do recognize it is the end of our formal program, but many of you were eager to win a coveted signed book from Paul. And so we are going to do that portion next for those of you who would like to stay behind. So I'm going to invite John Atkin and Christy Fong to help me out. We have this lovely wheel of names. And so all of you who have entered for the raffle are on this wheel. And Christy is going to spin this a whopping 18 times. And we'll announce the winner.
What if my name comes?
Lynn Copeland, congratulations. You'll be the recipient of a signed book by Paul.
Oh, Benevolent.
Bev Nan is the next winner. Lorna Fandrich, our community prize winner.
Yay.
Christina Lamb, you're the fourth winner. Raymond Pye, lucky number 5. I'm going to ask John to read out the next 5 just so I can help keep track of these prizes.
All right. Oh, we have Lori Leung. And as the wheel is spinning, we have mostly Paul's books as giveaways, but we also have a few other authors as well. That's why you had me read the name. All right, Sarah is our second winner in my 5. And see Lee. We need sound effects for this wheel, I think.
The Jeopardy music.
And Wesley J is the next winner.
Sorry, the wheel, when I found it, did not come with music.
It actually does have sound effects. We give some applause, but I think my... Here, let me see if I can give y'all.
Michael O'Hagan is the 4th winner in this set.
You're number 10, John?
Hmm?
Was that number 5 for you?
4, I think.
Oh, Bev.
Yay, Bev Wong. That's number 5 for me.
A book from Paul. So these next 5 are, 2 of them are the books that we honored last year. So there's Belonging by William Durr and Trop Sui Nation by Anne Hu. Catherine.
Catherine Clement gets one of those.
A Historical Atlas by Derek Kay. And there are 2 clocks from the coveted Nicole that shut down.
Oh, yay. There we go.
Sound effects, yay. Kiki Lum.
Is that 18?
It was total 18, so where did we get to?
10, 11, 12, or it should be at 13.
Okay. Keep going, Christy.
I'm glad it's only a virtual wheel.
So
Wow.
we'll run a couple prizes.
Okay, normally we'd be sticking our hand into a bucket, so depends on how you put it.
And Aaron Williams, so that gives us 14.
Mm-hmm. Yay, Walter.
And Jeffrey
He's
Wong.
very excited.
Yeah.
So while the wheel continues to spin, everybody who is being announced, we will contact you for figuring out how to get the prize to you, whether that is local pickup or through shipment.
Imogene Lim.
The total, Christy. But we'll take
I think it's the 17th.
Should be one more.
Yay, Pat.
There we are, Pat.
I'm just gonna count to make sure. Oh, we had 19. Oh no.
That's okay. We do have some bonus prizes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank goodness.
All right, there we go. There will be a bonus prize.
Larry Wong book, maybe.
I'll just get you to share our concluding slide.
There we go.
So once again, thank you for your continued support. Although we weren't able to gather, there are additional ways to support our society in lieu of our annual fundraiser. If you have yet to purchase these 2 publications, you're very welcome to. We recently published the 10th anniversary edition of Larry Wong's Dim Sum Stories, A Chinatown Childhood. So we're grateful for Catherine's work to spearhead that project, and John wrote a new foreword for that wonderful publication. And Catherine's book, Chinatown Through a Wide Lens, the hidden photographs of Yee Chow has been incredibly well received over the past year. We were fortunate to launch it just before the pandemic last year, and most recently it was announced as a finalist for the British Columbia Historical Federation's Lieutenant Governor's Historical Writing Competition. So we're very proud of Catherine's work with the community on that publication. And as some of you may have caught at the very beginning of the program, Catherine will be receiving an honorary degree from Simon Fraser University later this year. So a huge congratulations to Catherine. For those of you who have yet to become a member of CCHS or renew your membership, you are also invited to do that online to receive exclusive invitations or a discount to our publications. You are also invited to contribute a general donation or to specific initiatives like our Paul and Eileen Lim Commemorative Fund. So without further ado, I'd like to again thank you on behalf of all of our board of directors. Thank you, Paul, for staying up so late this evening in Toronto to be here with us. I know it's been a long time coming, but we're really excited that we were able to put this program together with you. And I believe there are a few folks you know that would like to stay behind to say hi. So if you're okay with that, we will keep the program open, but have a great evening, everyone.
Okay. Great.
Sarah.